Gotta get used to being back up here again after all last month almost having off. I guess I gotta get back in the routine again. This morning, looking at the bare minimum. Received the idea of this. Actually, it kind of kept coming back to me after the gospel meeting over in Greenwood. And so if you have an idea and it sticks with you, you write it down. Eventually, it might turn into a sermon. Here it is. The bare minimum, just thinking about what is it that we're willing to give. Are we willing to give of ourselves just a little bit, any at all, or a whole bunch? And I guess sometimes it depends on what situation we're looking at. You know, we have a lot of options, but get one that I think most of us can agree on. If you have a spouse, or a child, or a family, you have someone you care about deeply, how much do we give to that person? Do we give just the bare minimum? To my wife, do I give her the bare minimum of, I love you, but just once a month? I don't want to go too overboard with it. You know, maybe a kiss once a week, I can push up to that, I guess. The bare minimum to let her know that, yes, I still do love you. I'm wearing the ring. Doesn't that show something? Isn't that enough? Or do we want to give more? Do we want to show our love? Do we want to let it be more than just the bare minimum? How about a different example? From here to Moorhead is, when you get city limit to city limit, about 7 or 8 miles. Do you want to be sitting at about a less than 1 gallon in your gas tank? Most vehicles can get there in a gallon. What if you got to do a round trip? Do you want to have the bare minimum amount of gas in your vehicle to make the trip? Or would you like to have a little extra cushion there? Personally, I like the little bit of extra. Never know what's going to happen. You might get stopped by the train and you start sputtering on the tracks. Bare minimum wasn't good enough there. So as we think about that, Christ had an answer for this idea. And in his very first sermon, Matthew chapter 5, we start looking at this idea. Matthew 5, starting in verse 38 to 42, he says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him whom wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." This an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth has looked it up, and it's at least 3 points in the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 21, Leviticus 24, and Deuteronomy 19. And I'm sorry for that on the outline. Deuteronomy is not spelled dent. Thank you, spell checker and autocorrect. That is supposed to be Deuteronomy. So it is in the law. If someone does this wrong to you, then you are entitled to have a sense of there is a justice that has been placed in line by God. You know, we're not to go and I'm not to come and kill one of your chickens. I'm to lose one of mine in the process. I'm not to do intentional harm to somebody else or take something intentionally from someone else. There is an accountability. The problem is when Jesus is saying, "You have heard that it is said," he is usually addressing that the people have gone beyond the law and added their own flair to it. How many times has he said this to the scribes and Pharisees, to the religious people and leaders of the time who were doing wrong, trying to use the word of God as their justification? The problem is we don't have to take and retaliate. But it says an eye for an eye. Okay, but if it says an eye for an eye, if you stole $20 from me and I want the $20 back, Do I sue you for 40 instead? That's not an eye for an eye. We're now inflating it. We're increasing it. What we're looking at is do not resist an evil person. He says instead, go beyond the minimum. Okay, yeah, we could take and ask for that one item back, or be the bigger person. As we might think about it in some ways, it says, turn the other cheek. Give him the other also. If we are taken and given an insult, do we return an insult with an insult? It says an eye for an eye. If he insults me, I'm going to insult him back. Or do we turn the other cheek? Don't be like the evil person. We can do more than the minimum. We can show that we can turn the other cheek. We can show that in the next statement here, if anyone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak also. In our language here is if anyone wants to sue you to take away your shirt, give him your jacket as well. You know, the tunic is and I keep getting these mixed up. Let me read it again just to make sure I'm on the right spot. If they want to take away your tunic, if they want the shirt that's on my back, that's not as valuable as my coat. That's not as valuable as the cloak that sits around me and protects me from the elements. Give them that as well. Instead of fighting with those who are trying to do evil or trying to run us into the ground, instead, let's turn this thing around. Let's show that we can be more than the bare minimum. The bare minimum is to give my tunic because he sued me for my tunic. What about I give this little something extra? What does that do to a person? A person who has evil intentions away from you, and then all of a sudden you hit them with kindness. I've got it down here in a second, but kill them with kindness. I changed the word on this one because if we're looking at the lessons of Christ, killing someone is not the best visual impairment here. So, flood them with kindness. The same goes in this next illustration that Christ gives. Whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. I think the word compel here is very generous in that it doesn't quite give the full illustration. In this time, if a Roman soldier says, you carry my pack, he can make you do that up to 1 mile. There is no compelling. There is no discourse here of let me convince you that carrying my pack will be a great thing for you. You are now inscripted to service. Do this, or face the penalty of it. They can do that for 1 mile. Christ says, volunteer for the second. Instead of only doing the one and complaining the whole time, yes, I did my service, I pulled your pack for 1 mile. I complained every step of the way, but I did it. I did the minimum. I brought it 1 mile. Instead, he says, go with him with 2. Take a 2nd mile. You've heard that it was said. How about we look at it and elevate our service? I think that would also take and remove the complaining about it. Now, maybe after that 1st mile and he says, okay, you can take your pack off. He's like, no, let me just readjust the straps. Okay, I'm ready. What would that do to that person? Ready for what? I just forced you into going 1 mile with me. That's all I'm allowed to force you to do. Nobody likes to do this. Why are you volunteering to keep going? What kind of attitude does that bring? What kind of thought would that put into that person's head about you're not like everyone else? Enough people start doing that, they might get an idea. If only one person they ever encounter ever does something a little extra above the minimum, you're a rarity. And as Christians, aren't we a rarity? When God says, be a peculiar people, that doesn't sound like something that everybody sees all the time. We see this idea of being compelled into service we see that it's not just a voluntary thing, is that look at the cross. Before Christ got there, he had to carry his own cross. And out of the crowd, a person was picked saying, you help him carry this cross. He was just picked out. It's not a volunteer type thing. Some people might recognize the term being voluntold. You sit there and look for, ask, hey, is there anyone that would like to volunteer? And the first person to make a sound or put their hands underneath them just got volunteered. I just saw a motion from you. Congratulations, you're it. But I didn't do anything. You have the opportunity now. Take the opportunities. And I think that's an idea that he's trying to say is take the opportunity. Now this last verse here also says, give to him who asks of you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Now, I don't believe that this just means that every person that asks for anything, you just give everything. We have to be smart about what we have, but yet we also have the verses that tell us to do good unto all, especially the household of faith. We have to be smart about how we do this, but also don't shy from the opportunities of doing more than the bare minimum. And what is the minimum? I saw this phrase actually this weekend. Jesus is coming. Look busy. I guess the bare minimum, when the boss is coming around the corner, you want to actually look like you're working. You hide the game of solitaire on the computer, which is a lot easier now on the computer than it was on the playing on top of your desk. It was harder to hide 52 cards. Instead, now we just change screens on the monitor, and we look busy. Unfortunately, looking busy isn't even making the bare minimum. I don't like this phrase. We should not look busy. We should know Jesus is coming and be busy. But how busy do we need to be? In looking at what is the minimum, one element we can look at is in Acts chapter 20 in verse 7. It says, now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message till midnight. I'm not saying the minimum is staying here till midnight. First day of the week, we meet together. And we can go into the study about what is encompassed in meeting. There's the 5 acts of worship. We must complete each of those elements. But also, as we look at it, Hebrews 10:25 says that not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, so much more as you see the day approaching. As we gather together. Now, some people, this congregation meets 4 times a week. We have Sunday morning Bible study, Sunday morning service, Sunday evening service, and Wednesday night Bible study. Now, we have other meetings. We have our other extra fellowship opportunities. We have outreach opportunities. Now, according to these verses right here, it says on the first day of the week we meet. How many come only one time on the first day of the week? Can we make that check saying that, well, I've done it. It says meet on the first day of the week. I've done the minimum. But this is where I like to add in Hebrews 10, because it says, don't forsake the assembly, exhort one another. When we need encouragement, when I want to show my wife that I love her, is just putting on the ring every day enough? Or is that the bare minimum? Saying I love you once a month, once a week. We'll go with this illustration. Meet on the first day of the week. If only one day a week I tell my wife I love her, is that enough? Ask her and she'll probably say no. Ask me and I'll say no. I want to let her know. I want to exhort her. And it says so much more as you see the day approaching, which means that let's do it constantly so that we can be ready, we can be exhorted, we can be together. And the other big part about the minimum that I'm going to hit is don't sin. Show up and don't sin. If we want to look at the bare minimums here, and there's a reason this list is short, I'm keeping it short. We could add a few extra elements here, but I want to get to the next point where I spend the rest of the time, is don't sin. 1 John 3 and verse 4 says, whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Don't sin. Now, we can go through what that means. There's several lists that can be pulled up that show don't do this, 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 this. Rather do these. But when we look at it and we want to really dive into it, we need to remember I was jumping to my next verse here and it jumped off on me. Sin is not just committing one of those items on the list. In verse 17 of chapter 5, he says, all unrighteousness is sin. And there is sin not leading to death. All unrighteousness. Which means that we are told to meet on the first day of the week. If we don't show up, we don't encourage one another, we don't be edified ourselves, because we're to gather together to encourage one another. If all I'm doing is showing up and I'm not encouraging anybody else, am I doing my job? Am I doing the bare minimum? Or am I the one that's playing solitaire all day and I just hide it when the boss comes? We need to reach out and encourage one another. The great part about today is we have a fellowship meal. Oh, that's extra. Be careful, that's extra. But it's another chance to encourage one another to do more than the minimum. We get to the fellowship and then we come back in again. As Christians, we are to encourage and to be encouraged to do more than the minimum. Like I said, that person that does that extra little bit, he walks that second mile, he does more than what is the bare minimum. I like the bottom of this right here. I'm not most people. As God's people, we are to be a peculiar people, ones that follow Him. And as Christ says in Matthew 5, volunteer to do a little bit extra. They're suing you for your tunic, give them your cloak as well. You're required to do 1 mile, go extra. Take the opportunities that we get. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, it says, do good unto all, especially those of the household of faith. Do good unto all. The bare minimum just says that I have to give. It says I have to encourage. It says that I can do, but do good unto all. What is that word good mean? It's going to be depending on the situation. Someone comes up and they're starving and need some food. Do good might be share my lunch with them. Someone's is having a very bad day. Maybe I can be an encouragement to them. Even if that encouragement is just a shoulder to cry on. I purposely use the idea of me loving my wife as a husband and a wife ought to love one another. I took that example from the Bible. Didn't have to make that one up. Just had to read the material. When we look at Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 25, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church. This is how I know the bare minimum is not going to cut it. Just wearing a ring does not say I love you. Saying I love you once a week does not cut it. As a husband, I am to love my wife as Christ loved the church. How did Christ love the church? He left heaven, came to be born of woman, was raised in an environment and of people that did not care for him in all cases, who made his life hard. But every day, when he started his ministry, he preached. He reached out to people. He went to those who needed him. And ultimately, he died for the church. The message at Roosevelt Street this last week was very impressive when he related the church and the love that he had for it. He loved the church so much, he gave himself for it. How much do we care about each other? That's just the minimum. He gave his all. Are we willing to do the same? Christ gives us a preview of the judgment and that we will be judged by our works. Matthew 25, verse 31, beginning starts talking about the sheep and the goats, separating them out and talking about, you have done the will of my Father. And they were confused because it was talking about the being nice to one another, helping one another. It wasn't something great and miraculous. It wasn't something great and outstanding. It was the simple things. You went above the minimum. We can look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. He went out of his way. He paused his day to help someone else. Maybe they were on their way to worship, but can we take a couple of minutes and help? Can we continue to do something that is more than just the bare minimum, more than just show up? Christ gives us so many answers to this. Revelations 3 and verse 16, so then because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. If all we're doing is showing up, we're at least warmer than the cold that are sitting at home. But are we doing what we should be doing, that we should be hot? If we go to boil some noodles to try and cook for lunch, can we get away with just warm water? You're gonna miss lunch trying to do warm water. If the package says boil for 7 minutes, that means you've got to get that water going so that it can get into the pasta and cook it and rehydrate it. You just go to barely lukewarm water, it's going to have to sit there and soak for a good while. And I'm not sure it's going to come out the same. Be careful about trying to do just the minimum. Luke 17 and verse 10 tells us another way we can answer this. We have done all that which was our duty to do. We have gone beyond the minimum. We have listened to the words of Christ where He encourages us to do more, but yet we still recognize that we are yet unprofitable servants. We are still just a servant. Do we do the bare minimum to get by so that we don't get in trouble until the end when it gets found out that we didn't actually do anything at work? Or are we doing more than what we have to? Are we willing to volunteer to help out? Are we able to step up to certain things? Not everyone has the same gifts and abilities, but when something comes up that you're able to do, that I'm able to do, are we willing to do it? Are we willing to encourage each other more than just one time a week? Where's our energy level? Where is our determination? Are we sitting there because, yep, I'm here? Or are we continuing forward and trying to help encourage others in the process? Does anyone know that you're a Christian or that I'm a Christian? Now, I'm not saying that we wear a sign around our neck that says, I'm a Christian. At the very beginning of our journey as a Christian, one of the steps of becoming one is to profess out of our mouth that we believe in Jesus Christ, that we have sinned and that we are sorry for those and turning from them. Is that the only time we ever say anything? Is that the only profession we ever make? Are we trying to do the bare minimum? I've professed it once and that's all I ever have to do. Or do we profess it every single day in everything that we do? Consider the parable of the talents where you had a servant was given 1 talent and returned only 1 talent. The master said you could have at least put it in the bank to do the bare minimum of gaining some interest. He didn't even do that. He did return 1 talent. He didn't lose any. Did he try to say, I did the bare minimum? I gave it back to you. That didn't work there. Christ encourages us to do more. Use what we have. Do more than the minimum. Thought that was a good lesson that I heard from over there. This one's been modified. It's not a direct copy. But the idea got me to thinking. Some people you see are just always busy. And don't even get me started with that retired title of some of y'all. I'm retired and I ain't got no time. We change our schedules based on what we do. I got rid of one thing out of my life that took a lot of time, and all of a sudden that time filled back up again. What do we choose to fill our time with? Do we choose to do just the minimum in anything that we set ourselves towards, or do we decide to excel at what we do? One place I have never seen the word retired at is inside the Bible. We're not retired. We're always in service. We are a servant until our debt is paid, and we have taken out a debt we cannot pay. But luckily, by the grace of God, through the sacrifice of His Son and through our obedience to Him, we have hope, a confident expectation. But to do that, we have to go beyond the bare minimum. Let's stand up and go forward. Let's lead ourselves. Let's encourage one another. And let's try to do it every opportunity we have. Let's do that outside these walls as well, as we go to and fro, as we go to the different places, as we visit with different people, as we think about our own growth. What are we doing? Do we only get the Bible when we come to service? Or do we open up our Bibles at home and nourish ourselves there as well? I eat more than once a month. 3 times a month we meet and have food. I eat more than that, physically. Do we do it spiritually as well? Let's think about that. Let's encourage ourselves to do better and to do more. Let's encourage those around us, those who aren't here, those who don't come. Let's reach out at an encouraging arm. Let's reach out an invitation to others. While also we stand and offer the invitation now. If anyone has needs of the congregation, we offer them to you while together we stand and sing.